So good morning, everybody. I'm Lacy Frazer with wholesoulschool and Foundation. And today I am meeting with David Morgenstern again. David was my guest last month. And this month at wholesoulschool and Foundation, we have focused on the intersection of science and spirituality. That was our theme this month. We began with a blog on the topic, and then we had a fireside chat between Marie and I on the topic, and now this is our Transformation Talk podcast. And when I thought about the topic of science and spirituality and who I would like to interview on my Transformation Talk podcast this month, David was the first person to come to mind, given his deep and rich experience in religion and sacred texts, and his experience with universal principles and quantum physics, and kind of, he sort of epitomizes to me the intersection of science and spirituality. And I think we'll see that, David, as we talk to you more. I just wanted to do a little bit of a more formal introduction. David currently lives in Florida. He served 13 years in federal prison for money laundering, and he was released from prison in 2015. And he's also doing some phenomenal work now, giving back and living a life of service, helping men who are currently in prison. And I would love him to talk a little bit about that at some point as well. Mm-hmm. So I just want to welcome you, David. Thank you so much for deciding to be with me again this month. And we had a fun conversation last night in preparation for today. And this is a big topic. This could be for some a complicated and challenging and somewhat controversial topic. But I think what we're trying to do here at wholesoulschool and Foundation is take all of that energy away and actually fall into the beauty of the convergence and the integration of spirituality and science, because it's really clear that these things exist as a whole and exist together. And I know this is a topic that is near and dear to your heart and that you enjoy talking about. So where would you like to start?
Well, I think that the primary place to start is at this intersection, and I'm sorry about that. I don't know how to even turn that thing off. The intersection is a powerful place, because an intersection is generally two roads or more roads that cross each other, and a decision has to be made in that intersection. And in other words, which way do you go? And I think that when we see spirituality cross with science, there's been a lot of discussion about which road to go down. And I think that in this intersection, we ought to stay here a while. This is a time, a unique time in the history of mankind, that we do have a sufficient amount of science developed over the past many centuries. This is really the fast-paced, most in-depth way in which we've looked at our universe, both in the infinitely small and the infinitely large. And and by the same token, spirituality is very old. It goes back tens of thousands of years. There's plenty of evidence that actually spirituality or religion, or at least worship, preceded civilization. The doubters usually try to say that the civilization invented religion or spirituality to sort of control the population. And in archaeology, which is a science, they proved that that's not exactly the case. So in this intersection, I wanted to speak of convergence, as you said, rather than let's choose one in which road to go down. Because I think the more wisdom and togetherness, alignment that we get now in this subject, the less consequence we're going to have in our world right now, which is kind of a world, a default world of criticism or complaint or judgments, like, anyway, you're right and I'm wrong, and therefore you're condemned. There's this concept of
Oh, separateness.
of separateness. And it's going to be very difficult, I think, as quantum physics begins to accelerate in its findings past theoretics, that is to say, in experimentation, to say that we're not, whether it's spirituality or whether it's science, that we're not really examining eternality or infinity. And this concept that life goes on and on, mathematics goes on and on. The premise of particles going from waves to hard solids, you might say, goes on and on and on and on. The principle that spinning an object here it's spinning the same direction in infinity elsewhere. These are almost spiritual constructs. And what I want to see in the convergence, staying in this intersection, is really trying to see our world going from a share-it-all world, that is to say, we've got all social media and ways in which we follow all kinds of advancing circumstances and consequences. But what's going to happen is, and this is what I see in this in science convergence, is we're going to see a solve-it-all intention. Right now we have a share-it-all intention, and we're going to come into a place where it's okay, we have enough science to begin to technologically intrude into our problems, and yet we have enough spirituality to say, well, let's pray about it. You know, and since we have a planet, I don't know what it is, some 7.7 billion people, and 7.1 billion claim of faith, with which part of that 7.1 billion happens to be atheists, of about 1.2 billion. So you've got billions of people that believe in this faith-driven construct called spirituality, and there's about 8 million scientists, with which about 46%, or almost half of which, also declare that they are spiritual in their work. So we've got about a 4 million person atheist scientific community. We've got a 1.2 billion atheist believer community, with which that community of scientists belong. And then we've got everyone else, really, on the planet that has some level of spiritual intention. So at this convergence, there's this chance, I think, that there is this chance to begin to see doubt as a culture, which is science, and faith as a culture, which is spirituality, converge, because it's clear that doubt happens to be the precursor of faith. If you don't doubt that there's a God, then the potential for faith can occur. If you have no doubt that there is no God, then you're part of that crew of atheism, so which is a small part of our world. So I think we owe it to the larger numbers, if nothing else, to stay in this intersection, to observe and witness this convergence, and see how it adds into our lives, both scientifically and spiritually.
Beautiful. I love it. I love this culture of doubt and this culture of belief and this place where we are right now, where you and I are sitting in this moment, where Marie and I are sitting in this moment, where Whole Soul School and Foundation is sitting in this moment, which is this place that doesn't discount anything and that understands that there's possibility in everything. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about, you know, our viewers know a little bit about the story of the program that I offered in prison, and that's, of course, where you and I met. And I know that your specific group of men who went through my program, which included lessons and classes in both quantum physics and in deep spirituality. Mm-hmm. And you all sort of converged in this room twice a week for over a year. Mm-hmm. and had an experience together. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about that experience and how you would relate, or how it might be a metaphor for this convergence that we speak of.
Okay, I think the first thing that I would say about the class was that it was a very diverse group. There was 15 of us or so. And there were representatives from just about all the major religions, at least Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and types of Christianity, with which there are many, and then also there were scientists, and there were two engineers. We had a heroic fighter pilot that was also a fighter mechanic, a jet mechanic. We had a young African American. I don't want to. He's not a kid, but he was surely younger than the rest of us by 50 years, 30 or 40. And I think his perspective of what life was like in this intergenerational way, so we had this kind of millennial there, and then we had a very, very MacGyver type guy who had a very deep spiritual connection in his, not only in his walk, but also in his capacity as a seer or a visionary of what was coming in terms of the spirit world. And I think that his connection with science made him uniquely believable in terms of his radicalized science on one hand and his deep level of faith on the other. So it's quite a group of persons. And I think that another common denominator, though, was I'll call it the filter of our lives. So the filter of our lives it had spirituality, but also had brokenness. In other words, we were all in federal prison, and some of the crimes, like mine, but mine wasn't the only one, that had a lot of years behind it. And in that, you had people show up there going, okay, the filter of my life, and if regret's the destroyer of the soul, and I'm in the presence of this potential to finally understand what's going on in my life, part of that filter was spirituality in these individual religions. And I think that what I found metaphorically about it was that the conflict didn't exist between the various faiths, which is very unique, because you get that many faiths in the room, it's almost inevitable that people are going to quibble about which spirituality has the most depth or the most significance, etc. But everybody had a significant place in their life called spiritual connection. And through that filter, there was brokenness. And in that brokenness, there was great doubt. In other words, part of the prison mentality is, am I ever going to get out of here? Number one. And when I get out, what is it going to be like? And so, here you had a group of people that were really committed to, because I was with them, over 5 years, really committed to change. And part of that change was to see the filter of their lives differently, and then to see the filter of what it was that their inherent beliefs were, not being disturbed, but being enhanced by removing doubt and removing things that only science can do. In other words, proving things and then having those proofs be aha on the spiritual side of our individual walks. And that's why I think it is a metaphor for this shift from share it all to solve it all, where it's not just about let's just share everything we've got, let's particularly our experiences, but experientially, what are we going to do with these tools that have been laid at our feet? We have a long-term spiritual sense, and we have a reasonably growing tail of evidence that science is leading to the things that spirituality sought for a very long time. And that means, well, what can you do with it? And I think from a practical standpoint, and the class was very practical. It wasn't, let's just do a lot of esoteric thought and, kumbaya and all that, although I think we sang that once.
We did not.
I know,
but we felt it. We wanted to.
We felt it. But, what I'm sharing is that is a metaphor enabled us to begin to say, okay, if this scientific proof is there, then I can return to rationality. And by returning to rationality, I can begin to dump some of the emotional broken baggage of our lives. And the filter of our lives shifted to the spirituality we knew, enhanced by the science that we finally understood, to a place of change where we realized what was happening was really all inside of us.
Yes.
Infinitely small from quantum physics and infinitely large from spirituality. brought together that enhancement that, you know what, I think I can change. You know, all I've got to do is begin to follow these precepts. And finally, in my life, because I was older, I can follow these precepts. And what's going to happen is the greatness that is inside of me that I was born with, it's not perished. It's going to go on, and somehow all of this stuff, all the filter of my life, all the things that have happened to me, that I did or was done to me, etc., could add into a place where change could occur. And that's what I mean about solve it all. It's that heart that says, okay, I got this. My life is beginning to work very well, but what am I going to do with that? I think I should do something. And I think paying it forward or paying it back is the eventual resolve of saying, the world has this science and it's saying things have to change. Spirituality is saying, well, I know I have to change to be re-entered into this place and into this world of contribution. So if I just combine the proofs that change really is occurring, then changes can occur in my life evidentially. I've got science to prove it. And so therefore, I've just got to follow this and find my heart. And that's what we did in the class. And I can say, and there was also a Native American person in there. And I think I can honestly say by knowing the guys all that time and now into now, you know, the current time, is that the spirituality was not affected by, okay, now all of a sudden we're going to be just tambourines and yellow hats or whatever it is. Everybody kept their common faith, yet it was inured, it was enhanced by a excitement that even people like us could be welcomed. That this God who can't help but be merciful, that our thoughts can move ourselves to that place where a contribution could be made. And that was the really greatness of connecting at that convergence of science and spirituality.
So David, you know, you talk a lot about this group, and I think it is such a great sort of metaphoric example of this convergence of science and spirituality, in that everybody in the group came into the room from very separate paths. And you know, as Marie and I talked about in our podcast, you know, we're raised and we're conditioned to believe that to walk a path of science, you can't have a spirituality, and to walk the spiritual path, you really can't believe in science, or at least it can't be the predominant belief system. And so what we've been talking so much about is, now in this day and age, there really is this convergence. They really are not, you cannot separate them from each other, and science is sort of proving that, and spirituality has always proved that, and people are just seeing that now. And I want to, last night when you and I were talking, I wrote down a quote that I really, really liked, which was, convergence, what we're talking about now is convergence and the power of inclusion instead of the power to convince or commit. And, you know, that science kind of carries with it is this inherent, I guess what I'm saying is, we're not here to debate anything. We're not here to debate these two things. We're here to talk about them as existing in the oneness, that there is no separateness to them. And your group was this beautiful metaphor of the existence of that concept, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think that what we did in the group, and what I'm doing now, and I know is touchstones, the other guys that were in the group, there's this intention to get out of the era of complaint, and to get out of the era of victimology as a construct in which I can live out of my damage. You know, and the group took us to a place where, why do you want to live out of your damage? You know, why wouldn't you want to live out of your forgiveness of what has happened to you? Now, the power of changing your thoughts and changing your life foundationally was that the things that have happened to me, or the things that I did, can disappear because I have new information that says that in my rational mind does not have to continue to influence me emotionally. And that's a science comment.
Yes.
That's not a spirituality comment. We're not talking about coping here. We're not talking about persistence or perseverance. We're really talking about resilience. And resilience is a scientific comment. It's a comment about the ecosystems and the way in which the smallest of particles interact. They have a resilience. They can come out of being particles. They can turn into waves. And in that capacity to be changeable, they can return to, because of their resilience, to whatever it is that at the time is most suitable to enact in that particular place called quantum mechanics, quantum level. And it's like, what? I mean, if that's true for little molecules, then let's say I can bring that into, we'll call it a metaphor, so we don't offend anybody that we're overusing science. We use it as a metaphor, and that science as a metaphor is what helped us shift away from the hard lines of, you're a convicted felon. 85% of you will come back to prison. That means in the room, there's 10 of you, so 8.5 of you will come back. So, it's like all the statistical reasons why our lives were not going to work, and yet the science of what is workable and eternal and goes to infinity, etc., caused, at least in me, and I know, at least a couple others that are still close friends, that we're acting out of the rationality of science, but we're being spiritual about it. So that's why I continue to to leverage the concept of convergence, because I think if you start down this crossroads of science going one way and spirituality going another, what you're going to end up is you're going to end up deficient very soon, because there's no doubt that we live in a technologically forwarded world. I'm not saying it's technologically advanced yet, because we still have the same human problems that we've had for millennia. So for technological advancement to occur, we have to have a common change, like solve it all instead of share it all. I use those comparisons because anybody right now that's living in our current world knows what share it all means. The Facebook and all these social media and the discussions everybody has right now, everything's 24/7. But while you're in that mode of share it all, the question is, what is the doingness of share it all? And science is a process of doingness. It's getting something done called, I don't know what this is, so I'm going to do all these attempts to prove, and hopefully along the way you get to a state of proof. When these things are applied spiritually, what you're doing is you're letting your rational mind process things that heretofore everybody said, well, spirituality is irrational. Well, perhaps not.
Right.
Perhaps it's the most rational thing that we can do right now is to see our world not necessarily as it is, but to see our world as what it could once become by using science as that clock, that ticking thing that says, what did we do today? What are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do the day after? And I think that in my standpoint, because I'm dealing in practicality, as you said, I'm in the jail system now as a counseling person, and in that environment, I can guarantee you somebody's not asking about MC squared. They're asking about, is there any way that there's a God that can be merciful?
Yes.
Is it true? Is it real? Is there a way that I can get some comfort inside my heart right now? And so there you go. That science is, you give them a pill, which unfortunately, many of them choose to take. I don't mean that in any way, shape, or form as criticism against the system or against taking medication, but they're still coming to a spiritual counselor. So whatever science is doing, they're still saying, hey, can I have a clergy visit? I need to see someone. So that's how I see convergence. Let's just not step out of this intersection. Let's hold on to each other. Let's ingather and welcome these opinions. Let's treat them as convergence, which is aligning to reach a single point. That's what convergence definition is. It's aligning all these different particles or math equations or whatever, and saying, okay, we're gonna reach one point. And that one point in this particular circumstance, in my conveyance or the way I speak, is solve it all. Let's solve it all. We're smart people, and we're committed. We claim spirituality, which is kind of a guidance toward love and caring, or otherness, or other-centeredness. And in being that way, let's bring the science in. Let's get technologically advanced, and let's solve some of these worldwide crisis problems. How about that?
Well, amen, brother. I'm on board. Let's do this thing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you're right. And I love how you speak, because if you really listen to your words and the energy behind your words, I can even feel the convergence in you of these two concepts. And it's just so beautiful. And I feel the same. I speak a little bit. I don't have necessarily the what's the word? Maybe it's technological speak, but I speak a lot about these two subjects from lived experience.
Amen.
And I was not a spiritual person. I was not a religious person. And I found my way to a spirituality through what I would call circumstances that had no answers. And so it's kind of like, when my science and my medicine ended in my world, it wasn't solving what needed to be solved. It wasn't giving the answers that I needed to ease the pain, to fix the brokenness, like you were saying. I found myself turning to spirituality, turning to prayer, turning to a higher power.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just about just finding comfort in something outside of myself. And in fact, it wasn't that at all. It was really turning inward and listening to my soul and my higher self, and co-creating with some other kind of invisible organizing force. And I sort of see it as my higher self co-creating with this higher power that created the answers and the avenues out of my situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I witnessed miracles occurring one after the other. And that was certainly my proof. And of course, interwoven in this whole experience, it wasn't just turning to prayer and turning to a higher power. It was being an act. I was in the doingness, as you speak. I was an active participant in creating a different reality with this higher power within my own spirituality. I was creating this different reality, and I was moving forward. Where science and medicine, traditional Newtonian science and Western medicine, I don't want to say it failed, but I exhausted every avenue of it, and no answers came. So when I turned to this other realm, this other way of viewing the world, miracles started to happen in my life. People entered my life who helped me solve problems or find the answers, or alternative medicine came into my life. And just a series of things. And I've talked a bit about this over the last year with Whole Soul School and Foundation. So I say all of that because really, my lived experience informs me every day, informs my belief every day. There is not a cell in my body that doubts the existence of universal energies, of a higher power, of whether we call it God, source, love, And at the same time, I have no doubt in the power and the understanding of quantum physics, the invisibility of this force that it really is organizing all things. So I guess I just wanted to throw in the importance of this lived experience as we talk about this convergence.
Well, there's about 4 things you said that I think that putting a little experiential add on. You know, the first thing is the departure from a sense of convincing. You know, and I just go back to you in the class, and you know, knowing your how you sort these realities called spirituality and science contributions. You know, there wasn't any convincing amongst any of us, and I think there's kind of a talk about a metaphor. You know, prison is a unique place because you have to get along, because you're 24/7. You're in the presence of people that you may or may not like, you may not agree with them, they may be different cultures, etc., of all different things. And yet, you know, in that climate, what there is it's this kind of ecosystem, because nothing's disposable and no one's left out. In other words, you can't just say, this guy, we're just going to push him aside, because even I started in prison in the early 2000s. I ended up getting out in very late 2015, and I saw a shift even in the prison system and I went from, you know, medium to all the way down to a camp, as you know, and I'm sharing that as direct experience, because what I saw even in the prison system is a intentional departure from violence. Now, we all know that the part of the mythology of what's going on in the news and everything is that every jail is horrible. Well, there's a lot of societies in jails that have made it not horrible. And I think that one of the things that we saw in the class was this potential to no longer be counted horrible. You know, in other words, there was this chance that through this non-convincing, that by us taking in what it was that was suitable and rational to help us change, is what became really the science of what we were doing. And it was step 1, step 2, we had text to read, we had movies to write, kind of a scientific progression. And yet in the background was this sense, how does it add in to my life at large, which is contributing? Can I be a contributor again? Can I get well, you know, physically and emotionally and mentally, etc.?
In a holistic way, holistic wellness.
Correct.
Mind, body, spirit.
If anything, the whole construct of ecology, of holism, or a holistic reality, or even to the extent of a holographic reality, all that stuff was overlaid to a correction called my life can turn out. And I really believe in this convergence. I really believe that as we tap into science and we welcome its proofs, and we ingather spirituality as a way that has caused a lot of problems amongst people, except science does not cause a problem, because it's a proof of a universal construct in the physical. And then, of course, in quantum physics, in what it is that we cannot even see.
Right.
In many ways, we can't even imagine. And so that sounds pretty spiritual. So if you permit the construct of your own spiritual well-being to align with what is forwarded by science, you use the word failed in some of the work you were doing. I don't know that we ever really fail more than we forward.
Yeah.
That's a scientific concept. You know, when you're working a bunch of experiments, they don't fail. It's forwarding it until you can get to through the scientific method to the proof. And because we're in that zone where we want to prove something as we move along through the practical, what shows up is, I need to contribute. And this is a very powerful resolve, spiritually, very much different perhaps than traditional spirituality, where as opposed to modern spirituality that welcomes a scientific convergence, whereas traditional spirituality tends to say, well, that's different, and the twain shall never meet. we're at the intersection, but we're going to go on down the road, and science can do whatever it wants to do. I think that's displaced in this sense, because if we are unwilling to accommodate the forwarding of science to an advancement of science, then we would be unwilling to take our spirituality and turn it into a contribution as change, as progress. You know, we change can change, all kinds of change can occur, Lacy, but is it progress? We can forward things, but are we advancing things? We can forward the experiment, but have we advanced the science that we're looking into? These are you know, I'm deliberately overlaying scientific constructs or lexicons into the spiritual context, because I'm deliberately showing that spirituality is really enhanced by removing the doubt that a finished experiment tends to do. And we already know that doubt is the precursor to faith, as I said. So you've got two parallel constructs that are claiming to be parallel. That is, that their twains can never meet. And yet both of them are based on doubt. In other words, they're not based on this will never work, science, or, you know, there is no God, which isn't spirituality. And so here you have the same precursor to get to a end result or point. That's convergence.
Yes.
If you have a common principle, at least give it the chance to show out in these different cultural realities, spirituality and science. Give it the chance to see if it can converge, since its principle and what it's seeking is essentially the same. Or excuse me, what it is removing is essentially the same. So I wanted to get through that failed thing to forwarding, because I like it, because I don't think any of us truly fail. I think we have plenty of failures, but unless and until we realize that the greatness that is within us cannot be taken away. We were born with it. We have a right to it. And all the things that we do wrong, and this is what I share in the jails right now, the things that you've done wrong is merely, this is my personal experience, it is merely the things that have taken you away from what it is that you can contribute. You know, that's all that you've done. And the thing is, all the smarts and your capacity to take a risk and your wrong courage with all the Ninja Turtles with guns all over them and everything that you stood up against, that's courageous, but it's the wrong kind of courage, because it doesn't protect, it doesn't provide, it doesn't defend. You know, we're as spiritual persons, we're supposed to be providing. We're supposed to be reaching to those out that are having difficulty handling things themselves. You know, in the convergence of science, we bring vaccines, but our hearts are there because we're believers. You know, that's why you end up in Africa. You don't have Africa because you've got 10,000 doses of vaccine. You end up in Africa because people need the vaccine and they're hurting, and no one should stay hurt, and more people are dying, but we could save them if we just bring the vaccine. So that's an obvious convergence of science and spirituality.
Yeah, yeah. Well, David, you know, I as usual, I think you and I could talk for days on end.
Yes, we have. So I know
yeah, exactly. We've had the lived experience of that for 6 years, I think. You know, and it's just such a joy to be able to continue this conversation within the space of freedom in every sense of the word. You know, talking to you in your living room is a very, very special thing. And I think that both you and I, in so many ways, have freed ourselves from ourselves. And excuse me. And this is, in a large part, what the mission of Whole Soul School and Foundation is. Mm-hmm. It's the mission of my work. I also am going into the jails now and working with people in the same way. And my gosh, they have no interest in MC squared. They are asking the question, who am I? What's the meaning of life? What's my purpose? And how can I leave here, and how can I free myself? And I also just want to say too, just as a little plug, myself and a team are putting together a documentary film. We are seeking to make a film about all that we experienced in prison, that the change and the transformation. And it's not just about the men in prison, but it's the concept that we're all incarcerated in some way, and that we're all seeking to free ourselves from ourselves. And the key to that, to me, is looking within. So in order to really get out, we have to go in. And that's something that I know you've experienced, something I've experienced, and something many have experienced. So I continue to want to forward this work in bringing together the discussion and the conversation, the teachings around science and spirituality. And these conversations are such an important part of it. So I know we could talk a long time about it. I really, really appreciate you setting aside your day or part of your morning to do this with me. And I'd like to just ask all of our viewers and our listeners to please share this podcast with friends and family, or anybody you think may be interested. Visit us at wholesoulschoolfoundation.org. Visit our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Whole Soul School and Foundation is about to kind of expand to the next level. And that's coming. We're sort of calling it, Whole Soul School and Foundation 2.0. So there's a lot more to come there, and a lot more conversations like this to have, and a lot more contribution from a lot more people who are walking this path. And you are certainly one of those people on the expanded team. So I just want to thank you again, and thank you to our listeners. Thank you for your wisdom, David, and for your lived experience, and for articulating all of this in such a wonderful way. And I know we will do this again very soon.
Yeah, I hope so. It's always good. I really appreciate being able to do it. Just as an aside, I have to say it. My face is like this because of dermatology, not because I got whipped in a bar over the weekend. I went down to the jail. The guard says, "What happened to you? The long weekend?" It's like, "No, just a doctor's appointment." So it doesn't get in the way, though. And I think that the image of it for me, and Lacy knows this about me, all these experiences that happened to me that put me in the position of conversation about this, that, and the other. I was in a wheelchair for 18 months, etc. I'm a cancer survivor. They add into the potential to be able to actually contribute in a powerful way to people so that no one stays hurt. And that's kind of my mission. It's like, I think that there's a way that as a world, as we continue to advance and mature, spiritually on one side and in science on the other, that in that maturity, we're reaching a solve-it-all possibility where people look at and say, this should not be continuing. And now we have the know-how and we have the heart to do this. Let's put this combination together, and let's see if we can't make a world where science isn't criticized and spirituality isn't criticized, because we haven't advanced as far as the part of the population would suggest that we should have. Let's all kind of take this on. And I think we can, in our own little ways, all over the place, certainly as Lacy and Marie and I and my team are doing. It may not be a gigantic contribution, but I think reducing recidivism by going into these prisons and jails and getting these guys to the place that Lacy got our classes is a pretty big deal. And I think we should be out there. I think we should be training mentors. I think we should do that coach approach and get busy changing the part of the population that now is part of the problem, but sitting across from enough of them, I know that many, many of them want to be part of the solution.
Yes.
So that's my promo.
All right. Perfect. Okay. Well, we will sign off now, but thank you so much again. And I know we will talk again in the future.
Good show. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.